Hey everybody. Before the show starts, this is your host Brian Morrison with a short note. Can you believe it? We did it again. I teased that we'd be chatting with Ben this week about his time in the Special Operations Forces and switching to pilot. Unfortunately, I completely failed to take account for the fact that Remembrance Day was fast approaching. So we'll be having part 1 and part 2 of a Remembrance Day episode, and then we will finally get to our chat with Ben. I know some of you have been anxiously awaiting that episode, but I promise you these next two are going to be great, and I hope you enjoy them. So with that, here is today's episode of the Pilot Project Podcast.
Fuel and ignition switches on. RPM switches set. TD switches normal. Doors and hatches closed. Light out. Strobe light on. Restart check is complete. Clear left. Engineers, start number 2. Starting 2. Wind 31010 Pilot Project Podcast. Clear takeoff. Runway 31 left.
All right, we're ready for departure here at the Pilot Project Podcast, the best source for stories and advice from the pilots of the RCAF. I'm your host, Brian Morrison. With me today for our Remembrance Day episode is veteran and former RCAF pilot Duncan MacIsaac. Duncan, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, let's go over Duncan's bio. Duncan always wanted to fly, and so in 1974, he joined the CAF. After graduating from pilot training in Moose Jaw on the CT-114 Tudor, in 1977 he was posted to 443 Maritime Helicopter Squadron, flying the CH-124 Sea Kings at CFB, Canadian Forces Base Shearwater. He served on deployments on HMCS Huron, Saguenay, and Annapolis. A posting to 406 Maritime Operational Training Squadron followed, training other Sea King pilots. After 3 years there, he was posted to CFB Trenton at Training Systems Headquarters. While there, he was in charge of the officer training courses at CFB Chilliwack and the summer training courses for the regular officer training plan. In the spring of 1987, Duncan was posted to 880 Maritime Reconnaissance Squadron in CFB Summerside, flying the venerable CP-121 Tracker. While there, he flew missions supporting the Navy, rocket firing, fishery, coastal, and northern patrols. After the Tracker was decommissioned and put in storage in Mountain View, Ontario, he was posted to Corner Brook, Newfoundland as the recruiting detachment commander. While there, he enrolled numerous members into the CAF and was a key instructor for the recruiting course. In 1994, he was then posted to 405 Long Range Patrol Squadron, flying the CP-140 Aurora in Greenwood, Nova Scotia. As well as fishery and coastal patrols, he participated in exercises such as UNITAS in Argentina and RIMPAC in Hawaii. He was fortunate enough to fly the Aurora in formation with 3 Dutch P-3s in a 52-plane memorial flight commemorating the 50th anniversary of Operation Manna in the Netherlands. After 405 Squadron, he completed his 27 years in the regular force in Greenwood operations and continued working in wing ops for another 8 years as a reservist. Active in the community, he is currently the president of the Hansport and District Lions Club, a position which he has held before. A member of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 9, he was the service officer for 5 years and is currently on the Poppy Committee as the head trustee. Duncan has been married to the love of his life, Maureen, for 48 years and has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. So that's a lot of flying, Duncan. What sparked your passion for flying?
Well, like my bio says, I always wanted to fly, even as young as I can remember. But movies inspired me because I went to the theater to see anything that involved an airplane, whether it be the Battle of Britain or the Flight of the Phoenix, movies like that had airplanes in them. So I always wanted to fly. And so I joined Air Cadets. And I was an Air Cadet for a number of years. And the first flight I took on was on the Argus.
Oh, wow. That's a classic aircraft.
Classic aircraft. And I said, looking out the window, I said, you know what? I think I'd like to do this for a living.
I've heard the Argus could be a little uncomfortable. It was unpressurized, loud, lots of fumes, could be cold. So if you can go on that and enjoy it, you know you're going to enjoy flying.
Yes, that's true.
So basically, it's just been something that you've wanted to pursue since you were a kid.
Yeah, I always wanted to do that, and I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I just knew that I wanted to fly.
Now, Air Cadets back then, was it still a program where you could get your glider pilot's license and your private pilot license?
You could, but being in Sydney in an Air Cadet Squadron, you had to work really hard. Where we lived, you would often have to pool resources to get transportation into it and back from it. So it wasn't easy. I wasn't involved in any of those programs.
Okay. Actually, one of the coolest things I got to do, I did my start in air cadet flying programs as well. And one of the neatest things I got to do during my time on the Aurora was we were flying through Sydney and the cadets were doing their gliding. And when we left, we did a nice high speed pass and, gave them a wing waggle as we flew off. And that was really cool.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. I should say that as a cadet, I went to the summer camp in Greenwood. And where we were there, the single otter came down and took us for our flight. So that was the second flight I was on.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
So you knew you wanted to fly. What made you decide to serve in the CAF specifically to pursue a career in flying?
Well, that's an interesting story because, like I said, I wasn't sure how I would build up my hours. I thought maybe I'd have to go up north and do some bush flying. But a friend of my brother's told me that the military was taking officers right out of high school into a couple of different programs to be a naval officer, an infantry officer, or an aircrew. So I went in there and I said, hey, I'd like to be a pilot. They told me at the time that every young man that walks through that door wants to fly. But I said, I don't want to do anything else. So don't put me down for any secondary thing. I just want to fly.
That's probably smart because you probably would have ended up as infantry if you'd put that down.
Yes. And I know some guys did that. And once you're in, you find it very hard to transfer to a different MOC.
Yeah, for sure. That's even true now. There's lots of people who try, but it's all a matter of what's the current policy and how many people are they taking out of trades within the military versus recruiting off the street. And typically they're taking more off the street. So it's definitely challenging to do that. So you joined under the officer cadet training plan. Can you tell us more about how that worked?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about it. It was a program that, of course, we experienced the pilot shortages. It's kind of like a sine wave. There's too many and there's too few. So the officer cadet training program was initiated to bring people in quickly and get them trained and to a squadron. And basically, you're coming to high school, you skip university, you go right to basic training, and then on to flying training. At some point, you're supposed to do some French language training, but that didn't happen for me until after my first posting. I don't think the officer cadet program is running now. I think you have to have a degree. So either direct entry or the regular officer training plan.
And so this plan, the officer cadet training plan, didn't involve getting a degree?
That's correct. Now, later on, you could, if you wanted to, you could do courses and eventually have enough to do a degree, but I never did. I never did pursue that. But I did the officer professional development program, which was the 5 courses that you had to take that you had to X number of years to finish them, which I did.
Oh, yeah. Yep, those are still around.
As an aside, they used to call us a 13-week wonders because that was the length of the basic training in Chilliwack. 13-week basic training course. So that's what they called us when we initially came through.
So was the process basically just basic training and then on to flight training?
Yeah, it was. Yep.
What was the wait times like at that point? Like, was it pretty smooth, basic training and then pretty quickly on to your flight training, or how did that go?
Well, I joined in 74. There was a period after basic training that I had to wait until the course started in Portage, basic flying training. But I joined in October of 74, and I graduated from Moose Jaw in 76. So 2 years.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with the history of kind of how our flight training has evolved necessarily, because this was back in the 70s, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So at this time, there was still like a phase 1 program in Portage, and then you'd go to Moose Jaw where you got your wings. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And phase 1, what was that like back then? Was that pretty much a weeding out process of trying to kind of get rid of the chaff?
Yeah, correct. Phase 1 was more or less making sure you had the abilities to fly. And it's kind of funny because we had someone on our course who had 500 or 600 hours but it was all crop dusting. And he had no problem with the basic flying. When we got to Moose Jaw and started in the instrument flying, he just couldn't hack that. Having, I don't know if you're familiar with the tutor's hall, but what we call being under the bag. You couldn't see anything other than the instruments, and you try to totally rely on your instruments. So, he found that very hard.
Yeah, a lot of people find it pretty challenging the first time they go under a hood or I guess under a bag, which I imagine is similar. And all you have is your instruments to rely on. It can be pretty disorienting.
Yeah, it can be.
So you did your course on the tutor in Moose Jaw. What were your expectations going into flight training, and how did the reality compare to those expectations?
Well, I really didn't have any expectations because I didn't have a lot of experience with military training at the time. So I just remember at one point we visited Moose Jaw before our course started, and looking inside the tutor and thinking, oh my God, am I ever going to learn how to fly this? But very quickly, I would say by 3 or 4 clear hood trips, you knew where everything was and what everything did, and it was a pretty simple airplane once you get used to it.
That's funny. I think that's a feeling that most pilots feel at some point when they look into an aircraft, and maybe it's when they look into their first Cessna 150, or for me, I certainly had that feeling looking into the Harvard 2 at Moose Jaw, and certainly once I moved on to the Aurora. I think that's a really, really common feeling. You look in the cockpit, you look at all these unfamiliar switches, and you think, holy cow, how am I ever going to understand all this?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what was the most challenging or exciting part of the tutor course?
Well, I think the most challenging part was definitely the instrument training, because, like I said, when you're under the bag, you really don't know what's going on until the instructor decides to take the thing down and give you some clear hood and whatnot, so you can fly around instead of actually just looking at instruments. At the time, the simulator in Moose Jaw was very basic. It had no motion. The instruments would move, but so you could do the procedure. It was a procedure trainer only. So you would do the procedures and then do it in the real airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And so the most challenging part was being under that bag and trusting the instruments and relying on what you were seeing with your eyes.
So the simulator was more of a cockpit procedure trainer. That
Correct.
is what we'd call it now.
Yeah, it was.
And then what was the most exciting part of the course?
The most exciting was formation, because at the time, like I said, we did the full course in Moose Jaw, and I love formation flying. And I always remember on my formation test, the instructor, my test pilot, he looked at me and said, "You're going Sea Kings, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is about 20 minutes into the flight." He said, "If I tell you pass right now, can I use the rest of the time to do a little formation practice?" And I swear, if the canopy had been opened, I could have talked to the other aircraft for the rest of the flight. And it was amazing. Yeah, it was true.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the instructor was just able to keep it that tight.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Had that instructor been a snowbird or something, or just was that good at it from being on the course?
No, but he was trying out for the snowbird, so he needed the formation done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting something you just said there. You weren't done your course, but you already knew that you were going Sea Kings?
Oh, yeah. Probably about 3/4 of the way through the course, they would assign people based on the need. And, you always have your choices, 1, 2, and 3. But it's not necessarily your need, it's what the forces need. And at the time, they needed Seeking pods. I think probably about six of us went Seekings or helicopters at a Moose Jaw.
Yeah, that's still pretty much how it works. They do their best. They ask for everybody's like top 3 choices. They ask for your top 3 locations because maybe they can give you one and not the other. But ultimately, what does the forces need is going to be, they're going to do their best to make both things fit.
Yeah.
But the needs of the forces are the top consideration for sure.
Yeah, it is.
How did you feel when you found out you're going Sea Kings? Was that something that you wanted?
I got asked for Hercs. I wanted to fly Hercs. That was my big dream. But I wasn't terribly disappointed when I was given Sea Kings, because of course you have to learn new aircraft, and like I said, I just wanted to fly. It didn't matter what it was at the time.
I mean, that's the best attitude you can go into selection with in any case.
That's right.
You know, I've always said there's no bad cockpit in the RCAF.
True.
All of the aircraft have their positives and their minuses, and they're all pretty cool jobs when it comes down to it. So as long as you can go in with a positive attitude, you're probably going to have a great time.
Yeah.
I think we clarified this a little bit earlier, but you got your wings on the tutor course, right?
Correct. Yeah. I think at the time we were a very close course. We knew everybody, and to have the wings parade in Moose Jaw all together, that was an important part of our training. And I know now they break it off. If you're going helicopters, then you go to Portage, finish flying there, and get your wings awarded in Portage.
Yeah, that's right. Nowadays, after phase 2, you go to Portage for multi and helo. You would go to Moose Jaw to finish your training if you're going fighters. There is some changes coming there for where they're sending people for training right now for fast jet, which I think we're going to actually talk about in a show soon. But yeah, they split them into their kind of 3 streams now, and then you get your wings, and then you go on to your operational aircraft.
Oh, okay.
You got your wings on the tutor, and then you were posted to Sea Kings. Now, was there any basic helicopter course before the Sea King?
Yeah, there was. You would go back to Portage, the Prairie, and fly the Kiowa, we call it, or the Jet Ranger, I guess.
It's a Bell 206, right?
Yeah. And, you come from Moose Jaw and you think, oh, I'm a brand new pilot, got my wings, and you end up on the Jet Ranger. You can't do a damn thing with it. you can't even hover.
Yeah.
But very, very quickly, you'll learn how to use the right things.
The Jet Ranger is still renowned for humbling new students, for sure.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of buddies who are helicopter instructors here. And I remember on my multi-course, you could watch a new pilot on one of their early flights. Like we'd be doing our startup checks and things, and you'd look over at this helicopter and it's hovering, and it would start wobbling, and it would wobble more and more and more. And then all of a sudden it would snap and go perfect. And you knew the instructor had taken over.
Correct. Yeah. And
yeah,
you air taxied with it, and the first couple of times you try to do that, you'd be like, say, wobbling all over the place.
I bet it's a huge challenge.
It's a challenge, and your instructor takes you out to an open field, and you roam around the field quite a bit, and then he puts you in front of a tree, and you go every which way you left and right and back, but you won't go forward. So then he puts you in between 2 trees. You go forward and back, but you won't go to the side.
I imagine that's a powerful motivator.
Yeah, it's a powerful motivator. And before you know what you're doing, confined areas, which is basically landing or going into a hover inside an area that's surrounded by trees.
So what would you say was the biggest challenge on that course?
On that course, when a helicopter is flying, it's like an airplane.
Okay.
But hovering is a different story. So very quickly you learn that you don't want to be ham-fisted. It just takes a very, very light touch to use the controls, whether it be on the rudder pedals or the collective or cyclic. And a light touch works best.
Yeah, that makes sense. What was the coolest thing you did on that course?
The off levels, very challenging. When you land a helicopter, and you're basically on the side of a hill kind of thing. So what you do is you put the top skid down first, and then you very slowly lower the other skid. And at the same time, you're keeping, even though the helicopter itself is on an angle, you want to keep your rotor straight.
That sounds like it's really challenging.
Very, very much so. And then, of course, the other challenge is when you have an engine failure or a simulated engine failure, then, of course, you have to auto-rotate. So we spent a lot of time out on Grabber Green, which I assume is still there.
Grabber Green?
Yeah.
Yep, Grabber Green is still a training area there. Yep.
Where you do your auto-rotations. So you spent a lot of time out there.
Can you explain an auto rotation for the audience?
On auto rotation, basically you're using the airspeed you have and the height you have, keeping the rotor going, because normally the engine is keeping it going. Of course, you've now lost your engine. So you're descending down at a fairly good rate, and you pull in collective at the very end, level the aircraft and do your landing. And if you do it right, you can walk away from it. If you don't do it right, then, you might walk away, but the aircraft is not going to.
So, because I actually have never fully understood an auto rotation myself, do you have to have forward momentum going? Like, what happens if you're in a hover and that happens?
If you're in hover, we practice them with seeking all the time, because you spend a lot of time in the hover, and generally you're no more than 40 feet. So you have enough inertia in the rotor to make safe landing.
Okay. That's interesting. And yeah, that would be huge for the Sea King, especially when you're what they call in the dip, right?
Yeah. And the higher you go, you're actually going into the red area. And with a heavier helicopter, you can get what you call basically it's a disturbed air going through your rotor. And unless you get some forward speed on, you got to break that disturbed air.
What's that phenomenon called again?
Yeah, rotor settling. There's two different terms for it: rotor settling, and there's another one, but escapes you right now what the term is.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll probably get into dipping and all that stuff as we discuss the Sea King, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of which, let's talk about your Sea King years and your maritime operations. Your first operational posting was to 443 Maritime Helicopter Squadron flying Sea Kings. Can you describe the experience of flying these helicopters?
Well, and when you first go out and you're going to land on a ship, the deck looks very small.
Yeah.
So it's a very big airplane on a very small deck. And it doesn't look like you have a lot of room between yourself and the hangar face. But it's about 8 feet, actually, between you, the tip of your rotor blades and the hangar. So you do have lots of room, but again, it kind of goes back to your basic training in portage, where you'll go to the side a little bit, but you won't go forward.
It's funny. I think only a helicopter pilot could call 8 feet of clearance lots of room. That must have been something, because even by that point in the 70s, the Sea King had been around for quite some time, right?
Yes, it had been. Yeah.
By the time I joined the Air Force, the Sea King was quite old and had a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a maintenance pig. Did it have that reputation yet in the 70s?
Well, we had a number of problems with the cracks. They seem to travel from the sponsons up to the transmission mounts, the rotor head itself. So there was a lot of NDTing, non-destructive testing going on.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they were taking X-rays of various parts to make sure that you didn't. There was no cracks in any kind of serious location. So that was one of the problems we had. The other one was, I don't know whether you're familiar with translational lift. As you enter the hover, and the aircraft slows down, your disc, your rotor, is no longer basically a flying wing, but it's actually doing all of the lift. So it requires a bit more power when you enter the hover, especially if you're hovering around 40 feet out of ground effect or water effect, if you're hovering over water. And there's quite a wide vibration when you go through that period of translation to lift, which is around 30 or 40 knots. And in the Sea King, the instrumentation is mounted on rubber, but it vibrates so much that for a while you can't see it.
Oh, wow.
Daytime is not a problem. At night it can be a challenge. And especially with helicopters, if things don't work the way they're supposed to, the helicopter tends to back down. And one thing you didn't want to be doing is backing up. So there was a period that there was no night dipping, probably for about 3 or 4 months, until we had a better rad alt and a better Doppler system installed. So after that, we basically went back to night flying once the new equipment was installed.
Okay. And that makes sense. I just want to explain a couple things for the audience. So rattle being a radar altimeter that shows your actual height above the ground or water.
Yep.
And then can you explain what the dip is? Because we've mentioned that a couple times now.
Okay. So the Sea King was an anti-submarine aircraft, and it had what you call basically a sonar ball. We called it a sonar ball, but it was a transducer, probably about, it weighed a couple 100 pounds, and it could be lowered down into the water down to 450 feet, which is quite far down. The first thing you would do is do what we call a thermograph. Basically, it's the temperature of the water. And you understand that as an airplane climbs up in the air, the temperature drops. But it's the same thing with the water. The further down you go, the colder it gets. But it's not always the case. And sometimes there's what we call a layer, a thermal layer, where the temperature actually increases for 5 or 10 degrees. That's where a submarine would like to hide. They want to hide either in that boundary layer or just below it. And so you'd like to know the temperature of the water. You want to know where the thermals are. If you're hunting for a submarine, you want to know where you might be hiding at. So look, going into the hover, once you're in there, you lower your ball, lower the sonar transducer, and run it down, and then your sonar operator will know which depth to put the ball at for the best sounding. Now, what a transducer does is send out an electronic signal. And if there's something metallic, that signal will bounce off it and return back to the helicopter. And that tells you where the submarine is. And of course, you get into up Doppler and down Doppler and all of that, which you'd be filming with from the Aurora.
Yes, of course. Up and down Doppler, depending on if the sub is moving away or towards the source of the sonar.
Right.
And that's the dip in a nutshell.
That's if everything goes right. When things go wrong, you have to do what we call a free stream, which is basically taking the helicopter up as straight as you can until the sonar transducer clears the water. And then you can put on forward speed. And what you do is you get the helicopter stabilized and slow it down just so the cable is off the what we call the lip of the sonar transducer space, and then you can raise it, and it comes up at high speed, and then just before it gets to the helicopter, it slows down, and you can either leave it at the trail, or which is hanging beneath the helicopter, or you bring it into the seated inside the position.
And that's for an emergency, right?
That's correct.
And I remember even on the Aurora, we would be trained for that because we won't obviously go into code words and things, but if that happens, you warn the aircraft around, and those aircraft know to climb to get out of your way and to be out of the length of that cable, essentially.
That's right. Yeah.
And speaking of code words, for anyone who's worrying about operational security, obviously we are staying out of that world, and any kind of thing we're talking about, for example, thermal layers and where submarines hide, you can find on Wikipedia. So
yes,
don't worry for those who are hearing this and worrying about that. We're keeping our noses clean. We've gotten a little bit into this, but what kind of missions did you conduct on the Sea King, and what did those involve?
Well, as I mentioned, the Sea King was an anti-submarine aircraft. So normally, whether it be an East Flank or a NATO mission, you'd be normally assigned to be at the front or behind the fleet, looking for any submarines that shouldn't be there. You can also be tasked to do slinging, because the Sea King could do slinging operations. And I remember one time we were in the Mediterranean, and it seemed like there were helicopters everywhere of many different types and varieties doing slinging operations.
Can you explain what slinging is?
Oh, slinging is carrying a load beneath the air of the helicopter. So, you would do this to resupply the ship. So you would fly over to the supply ship and pick up a pallet, load underneath the helicopter, bring it over to your ship, and put it on the flight deck.
But I think you were saying something about there was helicopters everywhere, and
Yes, there were, but the controller, there were 2 or 3 different controllers, and they would assign each helicopter basically a route, altitude and altitude and direction to fly in, and they were really, it was really well coordinated.
yeah.
And even though the sky looked like it was almost overcast and helicopters, at the time there was it was really well coordinated, and everybody stayed in their own corridor.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. The first time, or maybe not the first time, but when you are in congested airspace and everything's being tightly coordinated, but there's just aircraft everywhere. For me, it would be being in a stack over a target in the Middle East, for example, and there's just layers and layers and layers of aircraft. It's pretty awe-inspiring the first time you see that.
It is. Yeah.
So you guys did anti-submarine warfare, you did slung loads. Anything else on the Sea King?
Personnel transfer, of course, that it was pretty easy. You would you'd fly to a land base somewhere and either exchange people or go to another ship and bring people over to your ship, kind of thing. That's pretty much the type of tasking you would get.
Did you guys do any search and rescue?
Yeah, we were. You could very easily be ended up at the ship with searching for somebody, and as it turns out, coming back one time to Halifax, we had a missing a member of the crew of the ship.
Oh no!
So we were assigned to go out and try to find him, but it was probably a couple hours after he had gone missing. The odds of finding would be very slim, because you think about somebody even with a life jacket on, there's maybe less than a third of the life jacket and a head above water.
Yeah.
That's really not a lot to see if there's any kind of sea state. In other words, if the wave action is fairly high. We've run exercises where we've taken a barrel and taped it up like a plastic jug kind of thing, and taped it up with make it radar reflective, and thrown it out and flown away from it, and coming back, you don't see anything until you're almost on top of it.
Yeah, I can attest to that. We would sometimes use the little float at the top of a sonobuoy.
Yeah.
Because it's an little orange triangle, basically. And if the ocean is not calm, you're not going to see it until, like you said, you're on top of it. And then you need to be lucky to look in exactly the right place. It's very challenging.
Exactly. Yeah. A life raft is a different story. It's bigger, and generally life rafts would have some kind of radar reflector that your radar operator could pick up.
Yep, for sure. So you served on HMCS Huron, Saguenay, and Annapolis. What are some of the unique experiences of living on board a ship, and what would you say was the hardest part?
Well, when you live on board ship, you're in very close quarters with other people. You're lucky as an officer because you share a cabin with one other officer. There are other messes on the ship that are much more cramped, so there isn't a lot of extra room. So that's one of the hardships you have. When you first go out on an deployment, the food is pretty good, but the longer you're at sea, the food starts to degrade. That's basically on storage, and but the hardest part, of course, is being away. I found it very difficult being away from the family for 3 and 4 months at a time. And I know that some of the ships now, when I see them leaving Halifax, it stirs up old feelings, and they're gone for 6 months, 7 months at a time. That's a long deployment.
Yeah, I can only imagine. My deployments were 4 and 3 months, and I found that very challenging. It is definitely the hardest part.
Back in the day, and I'm going to say that a few times probably,
we can forgive you for that.
The only communication you had was if you're lucky, you would go ashore and use the phone, and then there was an overseas call, which could be very expensive. So really, the only communication you had were letters, and everybody anticipated mail day when you got a letter from home.
So how did that work, getting mail? Would it be basically they know you're going to stop in such and such a port, and so they send it ahead to there?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think I've heard before that the Sea King sometimes acted as the mail delivery system, which I imagine made you guys pretty popular.
Yes, that's true. Everybody looked forward to the letter home.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. You mentioned the food getting worse over time. Is that just because basically there's fresh food at first, and then slowly you're into store like canned and preserved food and things like that?
Yeah, that's correct. And when you went into a port of call, that was one of the things. You resupplied ship, and then there'll be fresh food again for another while before you ran out again.
Before you're back to canned tuna or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you tell us about some of your more memorable experiences on the Sea King?
Yeah, I think probably one of them is, like I say, the medical evacuation that I did. There was an injured crewman aboard the ship, which we had to get to a hospital fairly quickly. And we had flown from our ship over to the supply ship, who had a doctor on board. And the doctor looked at him and said, there's nothing I can do for him here. He needs a hospital. So we were on our way to Veracruz, Mexico. And at the time, we were fairly close to the Yucatan Peninsula. And as you know, any aircraft that can carry a weapon, whether it be the Aurora or the Sea King, requires from a non-NATO country to have a diplomatic clearance. So they said, "Don't worry about your diplomatic clearance."
And that's a diplomatic clearance.
Diplomatic clearance, sorry. They said, "Don't worry about that. We'll get that from Mexico City, and you just fly that guy to a hospital and get him in there," which we did. When we landed, the ambulance was waiting for us, which was good. The patient went to the hospital, and I said, "Well, we're waiting for our doctor to come back. I'll send the crew in, and you guys go in and get something, to drink or to eat or whatever." I had to stay on board because the Sea King, although you could do a battery start, in the hot weather, you didn't want to do that because quite often you would get thermal runaway. So I was shut down the head and leave number one engine running because it could operate in the what they call accessory mode.
Okay.
It provides you some electricity. But once you shut down the head, you're no longer cooling the transmission oil. So you had to keep an eye on the transmission oil temperature. And if required, you would start number two and run the head for a while and make sure that the oil didn't heat up. Anyway, they were gone for about 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, an army truck pulled up and a bunch of guys with weapons jumped out and ran into the airport. And I thought, I hope they're not after my canoe. So very soon afterwards, they came out looking very sheepishly. And I said, "I wouldn't honestly, you were after somebody else." So anyway, our guy came back from the hospital, jumped on board, and they said, they're going to keep him in there and they'll medevac him back to Halifax in a few days' time. So we left. And it's a good thing we did because they flew a Challenger down a couple of days later to retrieve him. But the local area commander had his nose out of the joint that we didn't have a diplomatic clearance. So he actually impounded the medevac aircraft for a little while until until they finally got it all straightened out. So it was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because normally for an emergency involving, saving someone's life, all bets are off.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like if there's an emergency, who cares about diplomatic clearance?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's how the ship felt. That's how we felt. But apparently the Mexican commander felt differently.
Oh, well, that's his problem, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what challenges were associated with operating the Sea King?
Well, like I said, the big thing was doing the night dipping. When I was on 406, I had a pilot who had phone viters, but as his eyesight deteriorated, they decided that he had to fly an aircraft with a multi-cockpit aircraft. So he decided he would fly Sea Kings, and I took him out for night dipping. And I just remember looking across at him, and he looked back at me with very wide eyes and said, "What the hell are we doing here?" So I don't think he was terribly impressed with the night dipping part of the course. And it wasn't too long after that he left the military and went flying with Resources Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have very little time in helicopters at all and only sitting in the back, and certainly never at night in a dip. But I know the first time I flew low level at night in an exercise in the Aurora, and there were ships around, and I knew there were helicopters below us and not very far below us, and it's dark out and there's no moon. It can be pretty uncomfortable. So I can only imagine being in the dip at, what is it, 40 feet?
At 40 feet. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And, out on a calm night with a full moon, that's no real challenge. But like you said, when it's very, very dark and there's no reference at all, you can throw a flare out, which can be helpful at times, but it can also be disorienting. Because as you know, staring at one light at night, it can throw you off a bit. So,
well, you can fixate on it, and then you can get various optical illusions and things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd find that very uncomfortable, and I'm not shocked that a fighter pilot did as well.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because, you get used to it and you don't think a lot about it. But somebody who hasn't done it before, it can be a challenge.
Oh, yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about Remembrance Day and what it means to you. During your training, you experienced the tragic loss of your former roommate, Robert Hansen, and his instructor in a crash. I'll read Robert's citation now. The Star of Courage was awarded to Officer Cadet Robert Hansen and Captain Gary Fulton, who gave their lives on 31st May 1976. Shortly after takeoff from runway 12 at Regina Airport, a wild duck was ingested, resulting in an immediate engine failure. Rather than abandon their crippled jet aircraft over a populated area, the crew elected to divert it away from the city, thus sacrificing vital seconds in altitude. Both officers were fatally injured when insufficient altitude remained for a safe ejection. Robert Hansen, SC, 1956 to 1976. Robert served with 220 Red River Winnipeg Squadron Air Cadets. In 1972, he was the top graduate from the three Prairie provinces on the Junior NCO course, was selected the most proficient Squadron NCO in 1972 to 73, completing flying scholarship training in 1973, and received Manitoba's highest gliding award for glider pilot graduates in 1974. He was the squadron warrant officer prior to enroll in the air arm of the Canadian Forces in October 1974. So, can you discuss the impact this event had on you and what you learned from it?
Yeah, I remember that day like it was yesterday. At first we heard of it was on the news, of course, and I was driving into work and heard that the crash had occurred. Bob was my roommate up until I came home at Christmas time to get married, which was fortunate because I think had we remained roommates, I would have been much more deeply affected by the loss of his life. I know that the person who became his roommate after I got married, he did not finish the course. He didn't finish the pilot course. So I've often thought that that could have been me, depending on how things had progressed. But certainly, what they did was turning away from the populated area. They knew what they were doing. They know exactly turning themselves and putting themselves outside the envelope of the ejection seat made them unlikely to have a successful ejection. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and it's just part of the job. When you are talking about a veteran, you are talking about someone who would sign a blank check. And whether that check gets cashed or not, it's quite often depends on what kind of situation you're in at the time. One of the things that we talked about earlier about being a pilot and what you have to do is make decisions very rapidly sometimes based on circumstances. And they did. They made that decision, and it cost them their lives. But how many lives did they save? probably a lot.
Mm-hmm. How does this event shape the way you view Remembrance Day now?
Well, in Remembrance Day now, I certainly think about all of those who have sacrificed so much. Like I said, sometimes you sign that blank check, and sometimes it's filled out, and it can be up to and including your life. And certainly those who have injuries because of wearing the uniform, whether they've sacrificed their life or sacrificed their families for their own well-being, they've done it for others. And we always have to think of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that's just, it's something that was said to me when I was on my glider pilot's course, that if you stay in aviation long enough, you will lose friends.
Yeah.
And certainly in military aviation, there's by the nature of what we're doing, whether it be in combat or the intense training, and you're always pushing the envelope. It's a risky business, and there are risks, and every now and then there's a tragedy in aviation. And as Remembrance Day approaches, it's that time of year where you can reflect on that and think of those people that you lost and that you miss, and that their sacrifice, what it was for Canada.
Yeah, that's true.
It's obvious that Remembrance Day is meaningful to you. You're an active member of the Legion, where you served as a service officer for 5 years, and you're currently on the Poppy Committee as the head trustee. Why do you feel Remembrance Day is still an important day in Canada?
It's important to remember those that made the ultimate sacrifice, whether it be their loss of life in World War I, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan. There are a number of places now that Canada has been involved in. A lot of Canadians don't know about one of the situations that is I think of is the Medoc pocket. When you mention that to people, they don't know what that is really, unless you've done some reading on it. It was until Afghanistan, probably one of the largest firefights that Canadian soldiers were ever involved in since the Korean War. So it's very important that we do remember those that sacrificed so much. And certainly as a service officer in the Legion, I knew that veterans would very often be reluctant to put in any kind of claim, and I would always counsel that to if you think your injury or your what you're dealing with is directly related to your service, then put in a claim to Veterans Affairs and let them decide.
Okay, that's going to wrap up part 1 of our discussion with Duncan about his career and Remembrance Day. Tune into part 2, where we'll hear about his time on the Tracker and the Aurora, as well as his transition to civilian life and his involvement with the veteran community. This week, we'd like to not only thank you for tuning in to listen to this show and hear about this veteran's life, we'd also like to encourage you to go to your local Remembrance Day ceremony on November 11th. It only takes an hour, and it's worth the time to remember. We'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our veterans and brothers and sisters, both in and out of uniform, for their service. Thank you for your service, and stay safe. Do you have any questions or comments about something you've heard on the show? Would you or someone you know make a great guest on the show, or do you have a great idea for an episode? You can reach out to us at thepilotprojectpodcast@gmail.com or on all social media at podpilotproject. While we're on that topic, did you know that we release several videos a week on our social media accounts? Once again, you can find those at podpilotproject on all social media platforms. Before we part, we'd like to ask you for your help with the big 3. That's like and follow us on social media, share with your friends, and follow and rate us 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Keep the blue side up. See ya!
Engineer, shut down all 4. Shutting down all 4 engines.